They didn't remove the Gospel of Thomas because it was false. They removed it because it was too dangerous. It told you that you don't need anyone between you and the truth. This ancient text was buried for nearly 2,000 years, and when it was finally found in the Egyptian desert, it didn't describe a distant god or a church or a set of rules. It described something living inside you that has been there since before you were born. If that feels like something you already knew but were never allowed to say out loud, subscribe to this channel, because this is only the beginning. The Gospel of Thomas was not lost by accident. It was not misplaced, forgotten, or accidentally left out of the Bible during some innocent editorial process. It was hunted. It was condemned. It was buried in the Egyptian desert by people who understood exactly what it contained and chose to hide it rather than let it spread. And for nearly 2,000 years it stayed hidden, sealed inside a clay jar beneath the sand near a town called Nag Hammadi, waiting for a moment when the world might finally be ready to hear what it actually says. What was found inside that jar in 1945 was not a collection of miracles or prophecies or rules about how to live. It was 114 sayings, just sayings. No narrative, no resurrection story, no institutional framework, no priesthood required to interpret them. Just a direct transmission of words attributed to Jesus of Nazareth, recorded in a form so raw and so intimate that the moment scholars began translating them, it became obvious why the early church had worked so hard to make them disappear. The very first saying in the Gospel of Thomas reads like a warning and an invitation at the same time. It says that whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. Not whoever obeys the right institution, not whoever performs the right rituals. Whoever finds the interpretation. The emphasis is on personal discovery, on direct encounter with meaning, on the individual human being sitting alone with a text and arriving at something real without anyone else telling them what it means. That single sentence was enough to make the Gospel of Thomas one of the most politically dangerous documents in the ancient world. To understand why this text was so threatening, you have to understand what the early church was actually building in the 3rd and 4th centuries of the Common Era. Christianity at that point was not a unified spiritual movement. It was a collection of wildly different communities spread across the Roman Empire, each carrying different texts, different practices, different understandings of who Jesus was and what his teachings meant. Some of these communities believed that salvation came through direct personal knowledge of the divine. They called this gnosis. They believed that the spark of God existed inside every human being, and that the entire purpose of spiritual practice was to remember and reconnect with that spark. No mediator required, no church required, no hierarchy required. The communities that carried texts like the Gospel of Thomas were deeply threatening to the faction of early Christianity that was consolidating power in Rome. Because if salvation is a direct personal experience available to any individual who seeks it, then you do not need a priest. You do not need a bishop. You do not need a pope. You do not need an institution that controls access to God and charges a spiritual toll for that access. The entire infrastructure of religious authority becomes unnecessary the moment people believe they can find the truth inside themselves. So the councils met. The lists were drawn up. Texts that supported institutional authority were kept. Texts that pointed inward were classified as heresy. The Gospel of Thomas was formally condemned. Communities that revered it were persecuted. Their libraries were destroyed. Their members were scattered. And the text itself vanished from the historical record so completely that for more than 1,500 years most, people had no idea it had ever existed. But the sayings themselves survived, and when you read them without the filter of what you were taught to believe about Jesus, something strange happens. They do not sound like the words of someone founding a religion. They sound like the words of someone trying to dismantle one. Saying after saying points away from external authority and toward internal recognition. Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas does not say go to the temple. He does not say follow the priests. He says the kingdom of the Father is spread upon the earth and people do not see it. He says if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. He says split a piece of wood and you will find me there. Lift up the stone and you will find me there. These are not the words of a distant God requiring submission. These are the words of a presence that exists everywhere, including inside the person reading them, including inside you right now. The Gospel of Thomas does not ask you to believe in something you cannot verify. It asks you to look. It asks you to notice. It asks you to take seriously the possibility that what you have been searching for was never outside you to begin with. The implications of this are enormous. Because if the kingdom is already here, already spread upon the earth, already present inside human consciousness, then the entire story you were told about being fundamentally broken, about being born in sin, about needing an external institution to repair your relationship with God, that entire story begins to look like exactly what the Gnostics said it was. Not revelation, not divine truth, a system of control designed to keep human beings dependent on authorities who benefit from that dependence. The Gospel of Thomas was removed from the Bible not because it was false. It was removed because it was too true. Because it described a reality in which every single human being has direct unmediated access to the divine. Because it suggested that the most sacred thing in the universe is not located in a building or administered by an institution, but is alive and present inside the awareness of every person who has ever drawn breath. Because it pointed to something that no empire, no church, and no system of control can own, regulate, or take away. And that is exactly why it was buried, and exactly why it matters that it was found. What you just encountered is not a relic from a distant past. The Gospel of Thomas is a mirror. Every saying in it was written for the person sitting exactly where you are sitting right now, in a world full of noise and systems and voices telling you what to believe and who to be and where the truth lives. 2,000 years passed between when those words were first spoken and when they were finally allowed to reach you. Think about what had to happen for them to survive. Think about who tried to stop them, and then ask yourself why the things that get buried the hardest are always the things that point back to you. If something in this video landed differently than you expected, if something felt less like new information and more like a memory surfacing, then you are exactly who this channel exists for. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because what we are doing here is not content creation. It is excavation. Every video on this channel is another layer pulled back, another buried text brought into the light, another piece of the story they decided you were never supposed to hear. The next transmission is already coming. Make sure you are here when it arrives.